Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we share touching tales that highlight the transformative power of love, forgiveness, and family. Today's story takes us on a heartfelt journey with Malik, a young man who discovers the true meaning of family as he navigates the complexities of forgiveness, redemption, and his own search for belonging. Get ready for an emotional roller coaster that will inspire you to reflect on the power of connection in our lives. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Dr. Ethan Roberts, a highly skilled pediatric surgeon, found himself walking alone through the park near his home. The weight of the past few months had worn on him, and the usual bustle of the hospital had left him emotionally drained. Since his wife Rachel's death a year ago, everything seemed to have lost its meaning. Work, once his escape, now felt like a burden, and the quiet of his home was both a comfort and a torment. The house, once filled with Rachel's laughter, now echoed with silence, reminding him of what he had lost. As he walked, he found himself lost in thought, trying to quiet the internal storm of grief and loneliness. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his shoes, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Families were scattered across the park, children playing, dogs running, and people chatting as they enjoyed the fading warmth of the day. But as Ethan walked deeper into the park, he felt more alone than ever, separated from the world by the invisible walls that grief had built around him. And then he heard it, a baby's cry, high-pitched, desperate, and filled with pain. The sound pierced the stillness of the park, and without thinking, Ethan's body responded. His trained instincts kicked in. As a pediatric surgeon, he had witnessed countless medical emergencies. But this cry was different. This cry tugged at something deep inside him, something that had been buried under layers of loss and sorrow. He followed the sound, each step bringing him closer to its source. As he rounded a bend in the path, he saw a small bundle, abandoned on a wooden bench at the edge of the park. A baby boy, no older than a few months, lying alone in a basket. His little hands were clenched, his face scrunched up in distress, and his dark skin glistened with tears. For a moment, Ethan froze. His heart ached as he scanned the park, desperately searching for the mother or anyone who could explain why the baby was left there. But the park was empty. The families had long since gone, and the world seemed to have turned its back on this tiny soul. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he crouched beside the bench. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where's your mama?" The baby's cries softened at the sound of Ethan's voice. His big brown eyes, filled with tears, locked onto Ethan's face. In that moment, something inside Ethan shifted. He felt a profound connection to this child, an unspoken bond that cut through his grief like a knife. Without hesitation, Ethan reached out and gently cradled the baby in his arms. The child's tiny body fit perfectly against his chest, and the warmth of his small form seemed to melt away the coldness that had settled in Ethan's heart. The baby whimpered for a moment, but then settled against Ethan, finding comfort in his embrace. The peace of that moment was overwhelming. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, a feeling he thought he had lost forever. He glanced down at the baby, whose name, for now, was an unknown mystery. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He would take care of this child. He would give him a home, a life filled with love, even if it meant facing the uncertainty and judgment of the world around him. With the baby securely in his arms, Ethan hurried to his car, his heart racing with a mix of emotions: worry for the baby's well-being, guilt for not knowing what to do next, and something new, something that felt like hope. As he rushed through the hospital doors, he was greeted with raised eyebrows and curious glances from his colleagues. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a fellow pediatrician and close friend, approached him with concern etched on her face. "Ethan, what happened? Is everything okay?" she asked, her gaze flicking down to the baby in his arms. "I found him," Ethan replied, his voice tight. "He was abandoned in the park." Sarah's eyes softened as she led them to an exam room. After a thorough checkup, she assured Ethan that the baby, whom they decided to name Malik, was in good health. with no signs of neglect or abuse. But the questions that lingered in the air were unspoken. Who was this child? Why was he abandoned? And more importantly, what would Ethan do now? As the hours passed and no one came to claim Malik, Ethan found himself feeling more connected to the baby with each passing moment. He stayed by Malik's side, watching the child sleep peacefully in the crib, feeling a deep sense of responsibility and protectiveness. For the first time since Rachel's death, Ethan didn't feel completely alone. He had found something to care about, something worth fighting for. Later that night, after everyone else had left the hospital, Ethan sat in his office, the weight of the decision before him pressing down on him. He had always wanted a family with Rachel, but that dream had been shattered when she passed away. He had thought that he was done with the idea of being a father. But now, here was Malik, this little boy, abandoned and vulnerable, in need of love and care. He couldn't ignore the bond that had already begun to form between them. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a spark of hope. He couldn't just let this baby go. He couldn't let him fall through the cracks of the system. He needed to bring Malik into his life, to give him the family that he deserved. The next day, Ethan sat down with Sarah, his longtime friend and confidant. Over coffee, he shared his decision to adopt Malik, explaining the deep connection he felt to the child and his desire to give him a home. Sarah, though surprised, supported him. She warned him about the challenges ahead, from the complexities of adoption laws to the social implications of a single man adopting a black child in their community. But despite her concerns, she offered him her support. "I know it's going to be hard, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice softening. "But I also know you're the right person for this. You have so much love to give, and Malik is lucky to have you." Ethan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose returning to his life. He had Malik now, and he would do everything in his power to be the father the boy needed. As he left the hospital, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the challenges ahead, the legal hurdles, the societal judgments, the whispered concerns from his colleagues and family. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was Malik, and the future they could build together. Back at his quiet home, Ethan prepared a room for Malik, gathering everything he thought he would need: a crib, stuffed animals, clothes. As he stood in the doorway of the nursery, looking at the half-assembled crib, he realized that despite all the challenges, he was ready for this. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the stirrings of hope again. He was going to be a father, and nothing, not the judgments of others nor the obstacles that lay ahead, would take that away from him. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of making Malik his son, and somehow, through it all, he knew that he would find a way to make their family whole. As the months passed, Ethan and Malik settled into a rhythm that, though new, felt natural. The quiet of their home had been replaced by the sounds of a child's laughter, the clatter of toys, and the soft murmur of bedtime stories. Malik, now an energetic toddler, was quickly growing into a confident, curious boy, and Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the bond they were forming. It was a bond built on love and commitment, an unwavering promise to care for each other, despite the circumstances that brought them together. But while their new life together was filled with joy, there was one question that lingered in the back of Malik's mind. He was too young to fully understand the complexities of adoption. But as he grew older, he began to ask questions that Ethan wasn't always sure how to answer. "Why don't I look like you, Daddy?" Malik had asked one evening, his small face full of confusion. Ethan had smiled softly, brushing his hand through Malik's curly hair. "Because you came from a different place, buddy, but that doesn't change anything. You're my son, and I'll love you just the same." Malik's questions were innocent but persistent, and Ethan did his best to reassure him, even as his own heart ached with the uncertainty that he, too, carried. For Ethan, the love he felt for Malik was unquestionable, but the absence of Malik's biological parents remained a shadow on the periphery of their family. Though he knew that he was the boy's father, the fact remained that Malik had a past before Ethan, and that past had been left behind, hidden in the mystery of his birth. As Malik entered elementary school, he began to show an increasingly curious interest in his origins. He would ask Ethan about the day they met in the park, about his birth mother, and whether he would ever meet his biological father. While Ethan had always answered Malik's questions with love and patience, there was a growing sense of unease in his heart. The truth was, he didn't know the answers. He had never sought them out. He had never tried to find out who Malik's parents were, believing that their connection as father and son was enough to fill the gap left by the unknowns of Malik's past. But as Malik grew older, the questions became harder to avoid. It was on his 10th birthday, as they sat around the dinner table, that Malik finally asked the question that Ethan had been dreading. "Dad," Malik said quietly, his gaze fixed on his plate, "I don't know if I'll ever get to meet my real parents, but do you think they will want to know me?" Ethan paused, his heart heavy with the weight of the question. He had never discussed Malik's biological parents with him in depth, unsure of how to explain something that was still so complicated for himself. But now, as Malik's eyes searched his face, filled with the quiet hope that only a child could possess, Ethan knew that it was time to have that conversation. "Malik," Ethan began softly, "you are my son. Nothing will ever change that. But I know you've been wondering about your birth parents, and I understand why." Malik looked up at him, his eyes wide and filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "There's something you need to know," Ethan continued, his voice gentle but firm. "I don't know much about your birth parents. When I found you in the park, there wasn't any information about them. But I've kept you safe, and I've done everything I can to give you a good life, and I will always be here for you." But Malik wasn't satisfied with this answer. "But don't I have the right to know them? To know where I come from?" Ethan's heart broke at the question. He had always been Malik's father in his heart, but he knew that there were things about the boy's past that Ethan could never provide answers to. The uncertainty lingered, and Malik's desire to know the truth grew stronger each day. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and Malik headed off to school, Ethan sat alone in the quiet of their living room, contemplating the conversation. For the first time, he realized that it was time for him to help Malik discover the truth about his biological parents, even if it meant opening old wounds and facing a future that was still clouded with uncertainty. Determined, Ethan contacted the hospital where Malik had been brought that fateful day, hoping to track down any records that might provide some clues. It wasn't easy, and the process was slow, but eventually, he managed to dig up some information, enough to give Malik a starting point for his search. One day, as Malik returned from school, Ethan called him into the living room. He sat him down, his hands shaking slightly as he handed Malik a file with the records he had gathered. "Malik," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I know this means a lot to you, so I found some information about your birth parents. This is where we start." Malik's eyes widened with excitement and apprehension as he carefully opened the file. It contained a letter from the hospital, mentioning Malik's biological mother, Sarah, and the fact that she had left him in the park in an attempt to protect him from a dangerous situation. The letter also mentioned that Sarah's father, David Carter, had been wrongfully imprisoned, and that he had been desperately searching for Malik ever since his release. For Malik, the information was a revelation. His heart raced as he processed the information. David Carter, his biological father, the man who had left him in the park. But why? And what had happened to Sarah? Ethan watched from the doorway, his heart heavy. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, he felt the weight of it all, his love for Malik, the uncertainty that hung in the air, and the fear that the connection they had built might one day be tested. But Malik, now determined more than ever, knew what he had to do. The search for his biological father had begun, and despite the uncertainty, he was ready to find the answers that had haunted him for so long. It wasn't going to be easy, but Malik was ready for the journey. And Ethan, though torn, knew that this was something Malik needed to do on his own terms. The love they had for each other would guide them both through the uncertain path ahead. As the days passed, Malik's determination to uncover the truth about his biological father consumed him. He spent hours researching, poring over every bit of information Ethan had managed to gather. Ethan watched silently, his heart torn between supporting Malik's quest and fearing the potential heartache it might cause. Though he understood the boy's desire to connect with his past, he couldn't help but feel the impending shift that would follow. One evening, as Malik sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers and letters, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, and Malik's pulse quickened. He hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Hello, Malik." The voice on the other end was deep and steady, though it trembled with emotion. "This is David Carter. I believe I'm your father." The words hung in the air like a cloud, and Malik felt his heart stop. His mind raced as he tried to comprehend what was happening. The man who had abandoned him in the park, the man who had been searching for him for years, was finally on the other end of the line. "David," Malik's voice was soft, uncertain. "I don't know what to say." David's voice softened, carrying a mix of sorrow and hope. "I know you probably have a lot of questions, and I can't undo what happened, but I want to explain. Malik, I never wanted to leave you. I made a terrible mistake, and I've regretted it every single day since. I was wrongfully imprisoned, and your mother, she thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Malik sat back in his chair, the words sinking in slowly. He had always wondered about the reasons behind his abandonment, but hearing it from David himself brought a rush of emotions. Confusion, anger, and a strange sense of relief all tangled inside him. "I don't know if I can forgive you for what you did," Malik replied, his voice barely a whisper. "You left me. You abandoned me." "I understand," David said, his voice thick with regret. "I can never make up for the pain I caused you, but I want you to know that I've spent years thinking about you, wondering where you were. I want to get to know you. Malik, if you let me, I want to be a part of your life." The words struck a chord deep within Malik. He had spent so many years feeling alone, even with Ethan by his side, always wondering about the family he had lost. And now, the possibility of reconnecting with his biological father loomed in front of him, bringing both hope and fear. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," Malik confessed, his voice shaky. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't even know who you are." David's voice softened, understanding the depth of Malik's pain. "I know this is a lot to process, Malik, but I'm here. I've always been here, even when I couldn't reach you. Take your time. If you ever want to meet, I'll be waiting." After the call ended, Malik sat in stunned silence. His mind swirled with thoughts, each one crashing against the other. He couldn't deny that a part of him longed for this connection with his biological father. But another part of him, the part that had been hurt and abandoned, recoiled at the idea of allowing David back into his life. When Ethan entered the kitchen a few moments later, he could see the storm in Malik's eyes. Malik didn't need to say anything. The weight of the conversation was written all over his face. "Malik," Ethan began gently, his voice soft and understanding. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. I'll support you no matter what you choose. I know this is difficult, but remember, you're not alone. I'm right here." Malik met Ethan's gaze, a mixture of gratitude and pain in his eyes. "I don't know if I can handle this. Dad, I don't know if I can let him in." Ethan sat down beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. This is your decision, Malik, and I'll be with you every step of the way." Over the next few days, Malik grappled with his feelings. He spent time reflecting on the phone call, revisiting memories of his childhood, and what it meant to have a father. Ethan's unwavering support helped him process the emotions he had kept buried for so long. And gradually, Malik began to realize that, despite the pain, reconnecting with David could help him heal the parts of himself that had been left untouched for so long. One afternoon, as Ethan was finishing up some work at the kitchen table, Malik approached him, a look of determination on his face. "Dad," Malik said, his voice steady, "I think I'm ready to meet him." Ethan looked up, his heart swelling with pride. He had seen Malik's internal struggle, the battle between his anger and his desire for answers, and he knew this was a big step for him. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked softly, though his heart already knew the answer. Malik nodded. "I'm sure. I need to understand where I come from. I can't keep running from this." Ethan smiled warmly, his voice filled with love and support. Then let's do it together. You don't have to do this alone. The following week, they arranged to meet David at a local park. Malik was nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he walked alongside Ethan toward the meeting spot. His heart raced with anticipation, each step heavy with the weight of the moment. He had no idea what to expect, no idea how David would look or how their conversation would unfold. When they arrived, David was already there, standing by a bench with a nervous smile on his face. As Malik and Ethan approached, David stood up, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, with a deep breath, David spoke. "Malik, I can't begin to express how much this means to me," he said, his voice trembling. "I've waited for this moment for so long." Malik stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who had abandoned him, the man who had left him alone in the park. But as he looked deeper into David's eyes, he saw something that wasn't there before. It was a mixture of regret, longing, and a raw, unfiltered love. And for the first time, Malik felt a flicker of something that had been absent for so long: hope. They sat down together, the conversation awkward at first, but slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. David shared his story, explaining the painful circumstances that had led him to make the decision to leave Malik in the park. Malik listened, his anger slowly giving way to understanding. He could hear the truth in David's words, and as much as it hurt, he realized that the man sitting across from him had been through his own struggles and heartache. "I'm sorry," David said softly. "I know I can't change what happened, but I want to be here for you now. I want to be a part of your life. If you'll let me." Malik looked down, the weight of the moment settling over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was room in his heart for this man. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you," Malik said, his voice shaky, "but I think I can give you a chance." David smiled, tears filling his eyes. "That's all I can ask for." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Malik and David stood up. They didn't have all the answers, and there were still many steps to take, but they had begun something new, a journey toward healing, toward understanding, and most of all, toward family. Ethan watched from the distance, his heart full of pride. He had always known that Malik's story was one of love, of perseverance, and of second chances. But now, as he looked at the two of them, father and son, reconnecting in a way that felt right, he realized that their family bond was stronger than ever before. "Welcome home," Ethan whispered to himself, a quiet smile on his face. ChatGPT. As the story of Malik and his journey of reconciliation unfolds, each character learns a profound lesson that touches on the very core of human emotions: love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. For Malik, the most significant lesson is the power of forgiveness. Though he had every right to harbor anger and resentment toward the man who abandoned him, he learns that forgiveness is not just about letting go of the past, but about creating space for healing. By confronting his biological father, David, Malik discovers the power of understanding and empathy. In the end, he realizes that forgiveness is not for the person who wronged you, but for yourself, so you can heal and move forward. David, on the other hand, learns the immeasurable value of second chances. After years of regret and separation from his son, he discovers that the past, while painful, does not have to define the future. His determination to rebuild a relationship with Malik shows that no matter how deep the hurt or how lost you feel, it is never too late to change, to make amends, and to prove your love. Through his persistence, David learns that redemption is not a destination, but a continuous journey of proving your love through actions, not just words. Lastly, Ethan, the father who raised Malik, learns that love is not confined by blood. The lessons of selflessness, devotion, and unconditional love shine brightly through his character. Ethan's role in Malik's life reveals that sometimes The family we choose is the one that shapes us the most. He learns that stepping back to allow Malik to heal, grow, and explore his own roots is just as important as the support he gave Malik during their time together. His lesson is one of humility and compassion, understanding that true family is built on trust, love, and mutual respect. Together, the characters show us that life is messy and imperfect, but it is the connections we make, the love we give, and the forgiveness we offer that define us. Through hardship, they learn that family is not just about biology, but about the people who choose to be there for us, no matter the circumstances. Thank you so much for watching and being part of Malik's incredible journey of growth, reconciliation, and love. We hope his story has touched your heart and reminded you of the importance of forgiveness and the bonds we form with those who love us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story to inspire others. Stay tuned for more heartfelt stories from Empathy Stories, where every tale brings us closer to understanding the depth of human emotions.